I'm standing in the parking garage of Wright and Sons Manufacturing at 11:43 p.m. on a Tuesday, and through the third-floor window, I can see my father kissing my mother-in-law like they're teenagers sneaking around after prom. Except they're not teenagers, and what they're doing is about to cost me everything I've worked for my entire adult life. My name is Daniel Wright, and 20 minutes ago, I thought I understood betrayal, but watching Richard Wright, my own father, run his hands through Evelyn Harper's platinum blonde hair while signing documents on his mahogany desk, I'm realizing I didn't know anything at all. The manila folder in my passenger seat contains photographs, bank statements, and email printouts that my head of operations Marcus Chun handed me 3 hours ago with shaking hands and 2 words that changed everything. I'm sorry. Evelyn Harper, the woman who raised my wife Olivia, who sat across from us at Sunday dinners discussing quarterly projections and market trends, who I stupidly trusted when she joined our advisory board 8 months ago, has been systematically dismantling my position in the company while simultaneously destroying my family from the inside out. The affair started 14 months ago at a logistics conference in Chicago. I can trace it through hotel receipts and carefully deleted calendar appointments that Marcus recovered from the company server. But the real damage began 6 weeks ago when my father transferred his voting shares into a consulting trust that Evelyn now controls. I watched them separate, straighten their clothes, return to opposite sides of the desk like business associates, and something cold settles into my chest where rage used to burn. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., there's an emergency board meeting that I wasn't told about until Marcus broke protocol and called me 2 hours ago, and according to the agenda he forwarded, the single item up for discussion is leadership restructuring and executive transition. They're going to remove me as director of operations and install Evelyn as interim CEO, and they think I'm going to walk into that boardroom blind, unprepared, and broken. But here's what Evelyn doesn't know. My grandfather Harold Wright didn't just build this company on handshake deals and good faith. He built it on ironclad legal protections that nobody's looked at in 30 years because nobody ever needed to until now. I pull out my phone and text Marcus 4 words. Meet me at Kate's. Catherine Morgan, our CFO for the past 19 years, has been with Wright & Sons since before I was born. And if anyone knows where the bodies are buried in our corporate structure, it's Kate. She's also the only board member who wasn't informed about tomorrow's meeting, which tells me everything I need to know about how carefully Evelyn has orchestrated this coup. My phone buzzes with Marcus's response. She's already expecting us. Bring the folder. I start the engine, take one last look at that third-floor window where my father is now alone at his desk, head in his hands like he's the victim in this scenario, and I make a promise to myself that by this time tomorrow, Evelyn Harper is going to understand exactly what happens when you underestimate a right. The company my grandfather spent 40 years building isn't going to fall because my father couldn't keep his pants on, and my mother-in-law saw an opportunity for a power grab. I reverse out of my parking space, and as I drive toward Kate's brownstone in the historic district, I'm already mentally cataloging every forgotten clause, every outdated but still legally binding agreement, every contingency plan that Harold Wright put in place because he understood something that Evelyn clearly doesn't. In business, the person who plans for betrayal is the person who survives it. My marriage to Olivia is probably over. There's no coming back from what her mother's done, what my father's done, what I'm about to do. But the company can be saved, and sometimes you have to choose which battles matter most. What secrets did my grandfather hide in those old partnership agreements? And would they be enough to stop Evelyn before she destroyed everything? If you want to know how I turned the tables on the woman who tried to steal my legacy, keep watching because the real war hasn't even started yet. Drop a comment telling me what you would do if your own family betrayed you like this. And don't forget to subscribe, because Chapter 2 is where I discover the weapon my grandfather left me. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when Evelyn walks into that boardroom thinking she's already won. The documents spread across Kate Morgan's dining room table at 1:17 a.m. look like archaeological artifacts. And in a way, they are relics from a time when business was built on loyalty instead of leverage. Kate's silver hair catches the light from her antique desk lamp as she slides a yellowed partnership agreement toward me, her finger tapping a paragraph that I've never seen before in my entire life despite reviewing company contracts 100 times. Your grandfather was paranoid, Daniel, but he was the right kind of paranoid, she says, pouring her third cup of coffee while Marcus Chin sits beside me cross-referencing dates on his laptop, his glasses reflecting spreadsheet data that tells the story of Evelyn's methodical takeover. The clause Kate's indicating is buried in Section 12 of the original 1978 incorporation documents, hidden between standard language about shared distribution and voting rights, and what it says makes my pulse quicken. In the event of leadership transition occurring through mechanisms outside standard succession planning, or achieved through personal influence over controlling shareholders, all transferred powers shall immediately revert to bloodline descendants pending independent board review. I read it 3 times to make sure I'm understanding correctly. This means that if we can prove Evelyn gained her position through personal manipulation rather than legitimate business qualification, everything she's done in the past 6 weeks becomes legally invalid. Kate finishes, her sharp eyes meeting mine with something that looks like hope mixed with fury. Marcus pulls up a document on his screen showing the timeline. Evelyn joined the advisory board 8 months ago. The affair with Richard started around month 2 based on travel records we've reconstructed. The consulting trust was created in month 6. And last week she moved $30 million in company funds into offshore accounts that she claims are for international expansion opportunities. She's not just taking over the company, Marcus says quietly, his voice tight with controlled anger. She's positioning herself to strip assets and walk away with enough money to retire to whatever private island she's been dreaming about while destroying our lives. Kate stands and walks to her bookshelf, pulling down a leather-bound ledger that looks like it belongs in a museum instead of a CFO's home office. Your grandfather kept personal records separate from official company files. When he died 7 years ago, he left me this with specific instructions. If anyone ever tried to take the company through backdoor dealing instead of honest succession, I was to share these records with his heir. She opens the ledger to reveal decades of handwritten notes, meeting transcripts, and personal observations about every major business decision Harold Wright ever made. There are entries about suppliers who betrayed him, partners who tried hostile takeovers, even notes about my father's character that make my stomach turn. Richard has good intentions but weak moral fiber. Must ensure Daniel understands the difference between being loved and being respected. My grandfather saw this coming 20 years ago, maybe longer, and he built fail-safes into the company's structure that only someone with Kate's institutional knowledge and my bloodline status can activate. There's more, Marcus says, turning his laptop toward us. I've been tracking Evelyn's communications through company servers, legally, since everything on our network is company property, and she's been in contact with Hamilton Strategic Partners about a potential acquisition offer. Hamilton Strategic Partners is a corporate raider firm disguised as a consulting company, the kind of outfit that buys family businesses, strips them for parts, sells the real estate, and leaves nothing but unemployment and broken communities in their wake. She's planning to sell Wright & Sons? I ask, though I already know the answer. Within 6 months of taking control, Marcus confirms. The preliminary offer is already drawn up. $85 million for the company, assets, client list, everything. She walks away with $40 million after taxes as interim CEO. Richard gets $20 million for his shares, and everyone else, including the 230 employees who've built their lives around this company, gets severance packages and job-searching websites. The rage that's been building since I saw them together in that office crystallizes into something colder and more useful: calculated determination. What do we need to do? Kate and Marcus exchange glances, then Kate speaks. We need proof that Richard transferred his shares under romantic duress. Emails, texts, anything showing that Evelyn used the affair to influence business decisions. We need documentation of her financial movements that demonstrate asset stripping rather than legitimate business operations. And we need at least 3 board members willing to call an emergency vote to invoke the reversion clause. The board meeting is in 7 hours, I point out, which gives us exactly enough time, Kate says with a thin smile that reminds me why my grandfather trusted her above everyone else. Marcus has the financial evidence. I have the legal framework. But Daniel, we need you to do something that's going to be harder than any business negotiation you've ever conducted. She pauses, and I know what she's about to say before the words leave her mouth. You need to talk to Olivia. Tonight, before this becomes public. Because once we trigger this reversion clause and expose what her mother's done, there's no going back for anyone. My wife is at our home right now, probably asleep, definitely unaware that her mother is a corporate criminal and her father-in-law is a cheating coward and her husband is about to blow up both of their lives in a boardroom showdown that will make local business news for months. I check my phone, 1:53 a.m. In my contacts, Olivia's name sits right above Evelyn's, which feels like the universe making a very obvious point about choices and consequences. Give me 2 hours, I tell them, standing and gathering copies of the key documents that Kate's prepared. If Olivia's going to hear about this, she deserves to hear it from me first, not from tomorrow's emergency board meeting or next week's divorce lawyer. Marcus nods solemnly. Kate squeezes my shoulder with surprising strength, and as I walk out into the cold October night toward my car, I'm composing a speech in my head that starts with, "Your mother is having an affair with my father," and somehow ends with, "I'm about to destroy her career to save the company." There's no good way to have that conversation, no gentle approach that makes betrayal hurt less, but I owe Olivia the truth before I owe anyone else anything, even if that truth costs me my marriage on top of everything else I'm about to lose tonight. Could I make Olivia understand that destroying her mother was the only way to save everything my grandfather built? Or would I lose both my wife and my company before sunrise? The next chapter reveals the conversation that shattered my marriage and hardened my resolve. And you need to see how Olivia reacted when she learned the truth about the woman who raised her. Hit that like button if you're invested in this story, and comment below whether you think family loyalty matters more than justice when the people you love turn out to be criminals in designer suits. Walking into your own home at 2:30 in the morning, knowing you're about to destroy your wife's world, is a special kind of hell that nobody prepares you for in business school or marriage counseling. The house is dark except for the kitchen light that Olivia always leaves on when I work late. A small gesture of care that right now feels like a knife twisting in my chest, because in about 5 minutes that care might turn to hatred. I find her curled up on the living room couch under the gray fleece blanket her grandmother made, her chestnut hair spilling across the cushion. And for just a moment I consider walking back out, letting her sleep, handling this without dragging her into the ugliness. But then I remember Evelyn's cold green eyes across the dinner table last Sunday when she asked me how the Chicago expansion was progressing, knowing full well she'd already blocked my proposal in a private meeting with Richard. And I remember that Olivia deserves better than being kept in the dark while her mother burns down everything around us. "Liv," I say softly, setting my briefcase on the coffee table. She stirs, opens her warm brown eyes that still look at me with trust, and smiles that sleepy smile that made me fall in love with her 9 years ago at a company 4th of July barbecue. "Hey, you're home late. Everything okay?" she murmurs, sitting up and pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "We need to talk," I say, and those 4 words kill her smile instantly because everyone knows that phrase never precedes good news. I sit in the armchair across from her rather than beside her on the couch, because what I'm about to say requires distance, requires me to see her face when the truth lands, requires her to have space to process without me crowding her grief. "Your mother is having an affair with my father. It's been going on for over a year. She's been using that relationship to take over Wright and Sons, and tomorrow morning she's planning to remove me as director of operations and install herself as CEO before selling the company to corporate raiders within 6 months. I watch Olivia's face cycle through emotions faster than I can name them. Confusion, disbelief, anger, denial, hurt, and finally something that looks like the exact moment when your entire understanding of reality collapses. "That's not, my mother wouldn't," she starts, then stops because even as she's denying it, I can see her mind racing back through months of small inconsistencies that suddenly make horrible sense. "The Chicago conference," she whispers. "When she came back and was suddenly so interested in Dad's business. When she started having all those private meetings with Richard about strategic planning. When she asked me if you seemed stressed about work and whether I thought you were handling leadership pressure well." Her voice cracks on that last part because she's understanding in real time that her own mother used her to gather intelligence about me, about our marriage, about vulnerabilities to exploit. I pull out my phone and show her 3 photographs that Marcus took. Evelyn and Richard in the 3rd floor office, hands intertwined across the desk, him signing documents while she watches, them kissing beside the window like they're celebrating something. Olivia's hand flies to her mouth, and the sound she makes is somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "How long have you known?" she asks, and there's accusation in her tone that I probably deserve. 3 hours. Marcus brought me evidence tonight. There's an emergency board meeting at 9 a.m. that I wasn't told about until he warned me. "Liv, she's not just having an affair. She's committed corporate fraud, manipulated share transfers, and she's planning to destroy everything my grandfather built so she can walk away with $40 million. Olivia stands abruptly, the blanket falling to the floor, and starts pacing the living room with the kind of frantic energy that comes from needing to move when your whole world is falling apart. This can't be real. My mother is difficult, she's ambitious, but she's not. She wouldn't betray Dad like that. She wouldn't destroy your family's company. She stops pacing and turns to face me, and I see the exact moment when defensive denial shifts to terrible understanding. That's why you're telling me at 2 in the morning instead of waiting until sunrise. You're going to do something tomorrow. Something that's going to make this public. Kate and Marcus are preparing documentation to invoke a reversion clause in the original partnership agreements. If we can prove Evelyn gained her position through personal manipulation rather than legitimate qualification, her authority becomes legally invalid and control of the company returns to bloodline heirs. Which means me. I stand and take a step toward her, but she holds up her hand to stop me. So you're going to destroy my mother's career and reputation in front of the entire board, expose her affair, probably trigger my parents' divorce, and turn our family drama into business world gossip, all before lunch tomorrow? Yes, I say simply, because there's no gentle way to confirm that truth. But Liv, if I don't do this, Wright & Sons gets sold to Hamilton Strategic Partners by spring, 230 people lose their jobs, my grandfather's legacy disappears, and your mother walks away rich while everyone else suffers for her greed. Olivia sinks back onto the couch, and when she looks up at me, her eyes are dry but harder than I've ever seen them. You need to understand something, Daniel. My mother raised me alone after Dad's accident when I was 12. She worked 3 jobs to keep us in our house. She taught me to be strong and independent. And yes, she's made terrible choices, but she's still my mother, and you're asking me to watch you ruin her in public. Her voice is steady now, controlled, and I recognize the tone because it's the same one she uses in her own job as a contract attorney when she's drawing hard boundaries. I'm not asking your permission, I say quietly, and it's the truth even though it hurts to say it. I'm telling you what's going to happen because I owe you that honesty. But I need you to know that I didn't choose this fight. Your mother did when she decided to seduce my father and steal my company. I'm just finishing what she started. Then I guess we both need to decide what we're willing to sacrifice, Olivia says, and there's finality in her tone that tells me this conversation is ending one way or another. She stands, grabs her phone and keys from the side table, and walks toward our bedroom. I'm going to my sister's place. I need time to think, to process, to figure out if my husband and my mother can both be right or if I'm about to lose everyone I care about because 2 families decided to destroy each other over money and pride. She pauses in the doorway, doesn't turn around. For what it's worth, Daniel, I believe you about the affair and the fraud. I even understand why you have to fight back. But you're choosing the company over us, over our marriage, and I need you to own that choice because it's going to cost you more than you think. Then she's gone, bedroom door closing with a soft click that sounds louder than any slam. And I'm standing alone in our living room at 3:14 a.m. with evidence of corporate betrayal in my briefcase and the ghost of my marriage hanging in the air like smoke. I text Kate and Marcus. Olivia knows. She's gone. We proceed at 9. Both respond within seconds with supportive messages that don't change the fact that I just watched my wife walk away and might never come back. I sit on the couch where she was sleeping 40 minutes ago, pull that gray blanket around my shoulders, and let myself feel the full weight of what the next 6 hours are going to cost everyone I've ever loved. With the nuclear option, I was planning for the 9 a.m. board meeting save the company or just leave everyone I cared about buried in the fallout. Chapter 4 brings you inside that boardroom where Evelyn Harper thinks she's already won, and you won't believe the look on her face when I reveal the evidence that Kate and Marcus spent all night preparing. Smash that subscribe button because this story is about to explode in ways you won't see coming. And drop a comment telling me if you think I made the right choice putting the company ahead of my marriage or if some things matter more than business legacy. The Wright & Sons conference room at 8:45 a.m. looks exactly like it has for 30 years. Same oak table my grandfather commissioned, same leather chairs, same view of the manufacturing floor below. But this morning it feels like a courtroom where I'm about to be both prosecutor and defendant. I arrive early with Kate and Marcus, the 3 of us carrying boxes of documentation that we've spent the past 5 hours organizing into devastating chronological order, and we claim the seats at the far end of the table that give us clear sight lines to everyone who enters. Kate's wearing her most severe business suit, the charcoal gray one she reserves for hostile audits, and Marcus has the quiet intensity of someone who's been running on coffee and righteous anger since midnight. I've changed into my best navy suit with the tie my grandfather gave me on my 30th birthday, a burgundy silk number he said made me look like someone who understood power, and I need every ounce of that power right now because the people walking through that conference room door think they're attending my execution. Board member Sharon Hastings arrives first, looking confused because she wasn't officially notified about this meeting either, which immediately tells her something's wrong with standard procedure. Gerald Thompson comes in next, then David Park, both longtime employees who worked their way up from the production floor and who I'm hoping will remember loyalty when it matters most. At 8:53, my father Richard walks in with Evelyn Harper beside him, and the way she touches his arm before they separate to opposite sides of the table makes my stomach turn even though I've had hours to prepare for seeing them together. Evelyn's wearing a cream-colored power suit that probably costs more than most of our employees make in a month, her platinum blonde hair perfect, her green eyes scanning the room with predatory confidence. She notices our setup, the extra documentation, Kate's presence when CFOs don't usually attend what should be a quick leadership discussion, Marcus with his laptop connected to the room's presentation screen, and something flickers across her face that might be concern before the confident mask returns. "Daniel, I'm glad you could make it," she says with false warmth that makes me want to laugh at the audacity. "I know this meeting was scheduled on short notice, but we have some exciting opportunities to discuss regarding the company's future direction." "I'm sure we do," I respond evenly, not standing to shake her extended hand. And that small rejection creates a ripple of tension that everyone in the room feels. My father takes his seat at the head of the table where he's sat for the past 12 years since my grandfather's death, and he won't meet my eyes, which tells me he knows exactly what's coming even if Evelyn doesn't. At precisely 9 a.m., Evelyn calls the meeting to order with the parliamentary procedure of someone who's studied how to hijack organizations legally. "Thank you all for attending on short notice. As you know, Wright & Sons is at a critical juncture. Our market position requires bold new leadership, and after extensive discussions with Richard, we've determined that a management restructuring is necessary for optimal growth." She pulls out a prepared presentation that Marcus's laptop immediately projects onto the screen because we control the technical setup, and I watch her face tighten when she realizes we've taken that small piece of control from her before the meeting even started. Her presentation is impressive, I'll give her that. Charts showing projected growth under new strategic leadership, market analysis supporting international expansion, financial forecasts that make Wright & Sons look like we're on the verge of breakthrough success if only we make these critical personnel changes. Therefore, she concludes after 15 minutes of corporate speak that basically means she wants my job. I'm proposing that we restructure executive leadership with myself as interim CEO, Richard transitioning to chairman emeritus, and Daniel moving to a senior advisory role that better utilizes his operational knowledge while freeing him from the stress of day-to-day leadership. Senior advisory role is corporate code for powerless position we're creating so you can't sue us for wrongful termination, and everyone in this room knows it. Sharon Hastings shifts uncomfortably because she's smart enough to smell a coup even if she doesn't know the details. Gerald Thompson is frowning at his copy of the agenda like it's written in a foreign language. "I have a counter-proposal," I say calmly, standing and nodding to Marcus, who switches the presentation to our carefully prepared timeline. "Before we discuss leadership changes, I think the board deserves full transparency about how we arrived at this moment." The first slide shows dates and locations. Chicago conference 14 months ago, Richard and Evelyn both in attendance. Hotel records showing rooms on the same floor booked under the company account. Evelyn's face goes pale, but she recovers quickly. "I don't see how travel logistics are relevant to operational structure," she says sharply. "They're relevant," Kate interjects, standing to join me, "because they establish the timeline of a personal relationship that influenced subsequent business decisions in violation of company ethics policies and potentially constitutes corporate fraud." The room goes completely silent except for the hum of the projection equipment. Marcus advances to the next slide. Bank transfers showing Richard moving funds into the consulting trust that gave Evelyn control of his voting shares, dated 3 weeks after a romantic dinner in Manhattan that we have receipts for because Richard stupidly used the company credit card. These transfers occurred without board approval, without legal counsel review, and without disclosure to stakeholders as required by our bylaws. I continue, my voice steady even though my heart is pounding. Furthermore, the consulting trust agreement contains language that was drafted by, I pause for effect, Evelyn Harper's former law firm, creating a significant conflict of interest that wasn't disclosed to any party. David Park is leaning forward now, suddenly very interested, and I can see him doing the math on what this means. Richard has gone completely gray, his hands shaking where they rest on the table, and Evelyn is vibrating with barely contained fury. This is a disgusting invasion of privacy, Evelyn says, voice tight. Personal relationships have no bearing on professional qualifications. They do when those relationships are leveraged to manipulate corporate governance, Kate shoots back. And they especially matter when the person claiming professional qualifications is simultaneously planning to sell the company to corporate raiders within 6 months of taking control. I nod to Marcus, who displays the final bombshell. Email correspondence between Evelyn and Hamilton Strategic Partners discussing preliminary acquisition terms, valuation models, and timeline projections, all dated before this morning's leadership restructuring proposal. You've been negotiating to sell Wright & Sons while simultaneously positioning yourself to profit from that sale. I say, and now my voice has an edge that cuts through the corporate politeness. 230 employees, 40 years of my grandfather's legacy, and you are going to strip it all for parts and walk away with enough money to buy whatever life you've been dreaming about while destroying ours. The room erupts in overlapping voices, Sharon demanding explanations, Gerald asking if this is verified, David calling for legal counsel. But I'm watching Evelyn's face transform from fury to calculation as she realizes her options are narrowing fast. And just when Evelyn thought she could recover control of the narrative, I was about to reveal the legal weapon that my grandfather built into the company's structure specifically for this moment. Chapter 5 is where the reversion clause gets triggered and Evelyn Harper learns that underestimating a right is the most expensive mistake she'll ever make. So don't go anywhere, because you need to see her face when she realizes she's already lost everything. Like this video if you're as angry about corporate betrayal as I am. And tell me in the comments if you've ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right when those two things are in direct opposition. There's a moment in every war when one side realizes they've already lost, but hasn't accepted surrender yet. And I can see that exact moment flickering behind Evelyn Harper's cold green eyes as Kate Morgan stands and pulls out the document that's about to end everything. The leather-bound original partnership agreement that my grandfather signed in 1978 looks ancient in Kate's hands. Its yellowed pages marked with colored tabs at sections that nobody's referenced in decades. And when she sets it on the conference table with deliberate ceremony, even the chaos of overlapping arguments quiets down because everyone recognizes that something definitive is about to happen. Section 12, subsection 4, Kate announces, her voice carrying the authority of 19 years as CFO and 40 years of my grandfather's foresight. Harold Wright incorporated specific protections against hostile takeover attempts, whether from external parties or internal manipulation. The language is quite clear. If leadership transition occurs through personal influence over controlling shareholders rather than legitimate business qualification, all transferred powers immediately revert to bloodline descendants pending independent board review. Sharon Hastings reaches for the document, adjusts her reading glasses, and scans the clause that Kate's pointing to with her perfectly manicured finger. This is still legally binding? Sharon asks, looking between Kate and me. I verified it with external counsel at 4 a.m. this morning, Kate confirms, pulling out her phone to show an email from Morrison & Associates, one of Chicago's top corporate law firms. Not only is it binding, but the email correspondence between Ms. Harper and Hamilton Strategic Partners constitutes evidence of intent to commit corporate sabotage, which triggers additional penalties under Illinois Business Code. Evelyn finally finds her voice, though it's shakier than the confident tone she started with. This is absurd. My relationship with Richard is personal and has no bearing on my professional capabilities to lead this company into a sale that benefits you personally while destroying generational wealth and community employment. I interrupt, placing the Hamilton Strategic Partners correspondence on the table in front of her. These emails show you negotiating sale terms before you even secured board approval for your CEO position. That's not leadership, Evelyn, that's theft. Richard, who's been silent throughout this entire exchange, finally speaks up, his voice hoarse like he's aged 10 years in the past hour. I transferred my shares willingly. There was no manipulation. I believed Evelyn had the company's best interests. Dad, I cut him off, and the word tastes bitter in my mouth. You transferred controlling shares to a woman you were sleeping with 3 weeks after she drafted the trust agreement through her former law firm. You didn't tell the board, didn't consult company counsel, didn't follow fiduciary duty protocols. Whether you want to call it manipulation or just catastrophically bad judgment, the result is the same. You violated your responsibilities as a shareholder, and Section 12 exists precisely because grandfather knew that people make terrible decisions when they're thinking with something other than business sense. The temperature in the room drops about 20 degrees, and I can see David Park and Gerald Thompson nodding slightly because they've been in business long enough to recognize that sometimes the ugly truth is the only truth that matters. Marcus brings up another slide showing the offshore accounts where Evelyn moved $30 million in company funds. These accounts were opened 3 months ago under shell corporations that Ms. Harper controls. The money was transferred under the guise of international expansion, but no actual expansion contracts exist. No property has been acquired. No employees have been hired. The funds have simply been moved out of company control into accounts that would be extremely difficult to recover in the event of, let's say, a corporate sale where the new owners might not look too carefully at historical financial movements. You've been embezzling, Sharon says flatly, and hearing it stated so plainly makes it impossible for Evelyn to maintain her corporate composure any longer. I have been protecting company assets from mismanagement, Evelyn snaps, her mask finally cracking. This company has been run by sentiment and legacy worship instead of modern business practices. Richard understood that Wright and Sons needed fresh leadership unburdened by generational mythology, and yes, we formed a personal relationship. But that doesn't invalidate my strategic vision for turning a stagnant family business into a profitable enterprise. By selling it to corporate raiders who'll fire everyone and sell the equipment? David Park asks, his voice carrying the weight of 32 years on the manufacturing floor before he made it to the boardroom. My son works in quality control, Evelyn. My daughter-in-law runs the logistics office. You're not talking about abstract business units. You're talking about people's lives. People's lives would be better served by a company that generates sustainable profit rather than one propped up by outdated loyalty and inefficient practices. Evelyn argues, but her voice has lost its authoritative edge and now sounds defensive, desperate. And before you all look at Daniel like he's some kind of hero, remember that he's been running operations for 5 years and revenue has been flat because he's more interested in preserving his grandfather's legacy than growing the actual business. It's a good attack, I'll give her that. And I see Gerald and Sharon exchange glances because there's truth in what she's saying even if her motives are corrupt. Revenue has been flat, I acknowledge, standing to face her directly across the table. Because I've prioritized employee welfare and community relationships over maximum extraction. We pay 20% above industry average wages. We offer health insurance that actually covers families. We sponsor local schools and youth programs. And yes, that costs money. But it also means we have the lowest turnover rate in our industry, the highest quality scores and client relationships that span decades. Hamilton Strategic Partners would eliminate all of that in their first 90 days because people and communities don't appear on profit loss statements. I let that hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final blow. And more importantly, Evelyn, the reversion clause doesn't care about your strategic vision or your critique of my leadership style. It only cares about one thing. Was the transfer of power legitimate or manipulative? And we have documented proof, emails, financial records, testimony from Richard if he's willing to be honest for once in this mess, that your rise to power was built on seduction, deception, and fraud. Kate steps forward with the final document, a board resolution that she and I prepared at dawn. This motion invokes Section 12, subsection 4 of the original partnership agreement. It immediately suspends Evelyn Harper's authority pending investigation, returns controlling shares to bloodline heirs with board oversight, initiates a forensic audit of all financial transactions from the past 12 months, and refers evidence of potential securities fraud to appropriate law enforcement agencies. All in favor? Sharon Hastings's hand goes up first, followed by David Park, then Gerald Thompson. That's 4 votes including Kate and me. Richard doesn't vote because his shares are in question. Evelyn doesn't vote because she has no voting power anymore. Motion passes, Kate says with the finality of a judge's gavel. Evelyn Harper, you are removed from all positions of authority within Wright and Sons effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building, and you'll be hearing from our attorneys regarding the return of embezzled funds and potential criminal charges. The moment stretches out like broken glass, sharp and dangerous, and I watch Evelyn's face cycle through rage and disbelief before settling into something colder than anything I've seen from her before. "This isn't over," she says quietly, gathering her belongings with shaking hands. "You think you've won because you have old documents and family loyalty, but I have the best attorneys money can buy, and I will destroy this company in court before I let you paint me as some kind of corporate villain." "Then we'll see you in court," I respond evenly. Security is waiting outside. As security escorted Evelyn from the building she thought she'd conquered, I realized that winning the battle was just the beginning of a war that would cost me more than I ever imagined. Chapter 6 reveals the immediate fallout from the boardroom showdown, including the conversation with my father that either ends our relationship forever or begins something honest for the first time in decades. And you absolutely need to see what happens when the media gets wind of the corporate scandal that just destroyed one of Chicago's oldest family businesses. Subscribe and hit the notification bell because the next chapter drops tomorrow and includes revelations about Evelyn's past that explain exactly how she became the person capable of this level of betrayal. Plus, comment below telling me if you think I should have shown my father any mercy or if he deserves exactly what's coming to him. The conference room empties in painful silence after security escorts Evelyn out, her expensive heels clicking against marble floors with the rhythm of a countdown to something irreversible. And I'm left standing at the window watching her silver Mercedes pull out of the executive parking lot for the last time. The board members file out with murmured congratulations that feel more like condolences, because everyone understands that what just happened wasn't a victory so much as necessary amputation, cutting off diseased parts to save the whole, even though the surgery leaves scars that never fully heal. Kate squeezes my shoulder before leaving to begin the forensic audit. Marcus packs up his laptop with the quiet efficiency of someone who's been through corporate warfare before. And then it's just me and Richard in the room, where I just destroyed the woman he thought he loved and exposed him as either a fool or an accomplice, depending on how generous you want to be with interpretation. "Daniel," my father starts, his voice carrying the weight of someone who knows there's no apology sufficient for what he's done, but feels obligated to try anyway. "Don't," I interrupt, turning from the window to face him directly for the first time since this nightmare began. "Whatever you're about to say, that you're sorry, that you didn't know what Evelyn was planning, that you thought you were in love, just don't. Because we both know that none of those excuses change what you did." Richard slumps into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 62 years plus a few extra decades of regret. "Your mother's been gone for 8 years. I was lonely. Evelyn was intelligent and interested, and made me feel like I was still relevant instead of just the old man holding on to a company my father built." There's a confession buried in those words, an admission that his ego and loneliness made him vulnerable to someone who knew exactly how to exploit both. "Mom died of cancer after fighting it for 3 years. I say, my voice harder than I intended. She died in our guest room because you couldn't handle seeing her sick. So Olivia and I took care of her in those final months, while you were on business trips that we all pretended were necessary. And now, 8 years later, you've dishonored her memory by giving away her legacy to a woman who played you like a violin." The words land like physical blows, and Richard flinches with each one. But I can't find it in myself to soften the truth, because sometimes people need to hear exactly how badly they've failed. "I loved your mother," Richard protests weakly. "I know I wasn't strong enough during her illness, and I've carried that guilt every day since she died. Maybe that's why I was vulnerable to Evelyn's attention, because she made me feel like I could be forgiven for being human and flawed." "Being human and flawed is asking for forgiveness and working to be better," I counter. "What you did was hand over voting control of a 40-year-old company to someone you'd been sleeping with for barely a year, without consulting the board, without legal review, without thinking for 5 seconds about anyone except yourself and whatever midlife crisis you were medicating with an affair." I pull out my phone and show him the timeline that Marcus constructed. Every hotel stay, every dinner, every transfer of funds and power that occurred while Richard was supposedly conducting legitimate business. The Chicago conference was March of last year. I continue, scrolling through the evidence. By May you were having weekly dinners. By July you'd introduced her to the board as a strategic consultant. By September you'd created the consulting trust. And by November she'd moved $30 million into offshore accounts while planning to sell the company. 6 months, Dad. It took her 6 months to completely compromise your judgment and position herself to destroy everything grandfather built. Richard stands abruptly, walks to the window, stares down at the manufacturing floor where second-shift workers are arriving for their afternoon rotation. What do you want from me, Daniel? You've already taken back the company. You've exposed the affair. You've humiliated me in front of the board. What's left? Accountability, I answer immediately. I want you to own what you did without excuses or justifications. I want you to resign from the board officially and transfer your remaining shares into a trust that you don't control. I want you to cooperate fully with the forensic audit and testify against Evelyn if this goes to court. And I want you to understand that our relationship as father and son is over until you prove, and I mean actually prove through years of different behavior, that you're someone who can be trusted again. The silence that follows is heavier than any argument could be because we both know I'm not making demands that can be negotiated. I'm stating consequences that are already in motion, whether Richard agrees to them or not. I'll do it, Richard says finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll resign, transfer the shares, cooperate with everything. But Daniel, you need to know that I didn't intend for any of this to happen. I didn't know about the Hamilton Strategic Partners deal. I didn't know she was embezzling funds. You thought she actually cared about you and the company, I finish for him. But the problem, Dad, is that you didn't think at all. You felt, and you wanted, and you let those impulses override every responsibility you had to this company, to our employees, to our family's legacy. So your intentions don't matter anymore. Only the consequences matter, and those consequences are going to follow both of you for the rest of your lives. My phone buzzes with a text from Olivia, the first communication I've received from her since she left our house at 3 a.m. Saw the news. My mother called me screaming. Are you okay? I stare at the message, trying to figure out how to answer that question honestly when I've just destroyed my marriage to save a company and confronted my father about betrayals that span years. I have to go, I tell Richard, gathering my briefcase. Kate will send you the paperwork for the share transfer and resignation. Sign it by end of business today, or we'll pursue legal action for breach of fiduciary duty on top of everything else. I'm almost to the door when Richard's voice stops me. Your grandfather would be proud of what you did today. He built those protections because he understood that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, and legacy requires constant defense. But Daniel, he also understood that family is the only thing that matters when the business is gone, and right now you're losing both. I don't respond because there's nothing to say to that truth, so I walk out of the conference room and head toward my office where Kate is already coordinating with external auditors and Marcus is fielding calls from concerned department heads who heard rumors about the executive shakeup. My phone is lighting up with messages from business reporters who somehow already got wind of the story, and I know that by tomorrow morning Wright and Sons is going to be Chicago business section headlines for all the wrong reasons. Family business torn apart by affair and fraud. Corporate coup fails at local manufacturing company. Mother-in-law's scheme exposed in dramatic board meeting. The narrative is going to be messy and public and painful, but at least it's going to be true, which is more than I could say if I'd let Evelyn's version of events become the official story. I text Olivia back. I'm okay. We need to talk. Not about your mother or the company. About us. The 3 dots indicating she's typing appear, then disappear, then appear again, like she's composing and deleting responses trying to find words that don't exist for situations like ours. Finally, coffee shop on Madison. 1 hour. Don't bring lawyers or evidence or business plans. Just bring my husband, if he still exists somewhere under the CEO you had to become today. Could I save my marriage after choosing the company over my wife's family? Or was some betrayal too deep to bridge even with honesty and time? Chapter 7 takes you into that coffee shop conversation where Olivia and I either find a path forward or admit that the collateral damage from corporate warfare includes the most important relationship in my life. And you need to hear what she says about her mother, about me, and about whether love can survive when everyone you trust turns out to be someone different than you thought. Leave a like if you're emotionally invested in whether Daniel's marriage survives. And comment telling me what you would say to your spouse if their parent destroyed your life's work and you had to choose between justice and keeping the peace. The coffee shop on Madison Street is one of those deliberately rustic places with exposed brick and mismatched furniture that's supposed to feel authentic, but mostly just feels like a stage set for difficult conversations. And when I walk in at 2:15 p.m., I see Olivia already sitting in the back corner booth, where we had our first real date 9 years ago. She's wearing jeans and a gray sweater instead of her usual work attire, her chestnut hair pulled back in a messy ponytail that tells me she hasn't slept any more than I have. And when our eyes meet across the crowded shop, there's a moment of recognition that cuts through all the corporate drama and family betrayal to touch something more fundamental about who we are when we're not playing roles in other people's disasters. I order 2 cappuccinos, her usual and mine, and carry them to the booth, sliding into the seat across from her with the careful distance of someone who's no longer sure what physical proximity is appropriate when your marriage might be ending. Thank you for meeting me. I start, which sounds absurdly formal given that we've been married for 7 years and have shared a bed for 9, but formal is all I have right now because everything else feels too raw to touch. I wasn't sure you would after what happened this morning. Olivia wraps both hands around her coffee cup like she's trying to absorb warmth through ceramic. And when she speaks, her voice is steadier than I expected, but carrying an edge of exhaustion that matches my own. I spent the morning with my mother. She's staying at the Fairmont downtown because apparently she can't go home since my father changed the locks, which I learned about from a text message while I was trying to explain to my sister why our family just became Chicago's most entertaining business scandal. She takes a sip of coffee, eyes never leaving mine. My mother called you a liar and a manipulator. She said you manufactured evidence because you were jealous of her capabilities and threatened by actual leadership. She said my father seduced her, not the other way around, and everything she did was legally justified business strategy that you're twisting into something criminal because you can't handle competition. I let her finish without interrupting because she deserves to voice her mother's defense even if we both know it's built on lies. And when she's done, I pull out my phone and slide it across the table showing the email thread where Evelyn explicitly discussed using her relationship with Richard to secure favorable positioning before the board restructuring. Olivia reads it, her jaw tightening, then pushes the phone back toward me. I know my mother is lying. I knew at the moment she started her defense this morning because she used her courtroom voice, the one she only uses when she's constructing narratives instead of telling truth. But Daniel, she's still my mother. I still remember her working double shifts to keep me in private school. I still remember her teaching me to be strong and never apologize for ambition. And now I'm supposed to watch her get destroyed publicly while I stand beside the man who orchestrated it. The question hangs between us like smoke, impossible to wave away or breathe through without choking. You're not supposed to do anything, I respond carefully. What you choose to do with your relationship with your mother is your decision. And I won't judge you for it, even if you decide to maintain contact or try to help her through whatever legal consequences she's facing. But Liv, I need you to understand something. I didn't orchestrate her destruction. I responded to her attempt to destroy the company my grandfather built, to steal from our employees, to manipulate my father into betraying everything he was supposed to protect. I didn't start this war. I just refused to surrender. Olivia's eyes fill with tears that she refuses to let fall, and I recognize that particular expression because I've seen it before during her mother's cross-examinations when Olivia was a junior attorney learning how to be ruthless while remaining human. The problem is that you're right and I hate you for being right because it means I have to choose between my mother who raised me and my husband who protected something that matters. And there's no choice I can make that doesn't destroy part of who I am. She finally lets one tear escape, wipes it away angrily like it's a weakness she can't afford. Last night when I left our house, I was so angry at you for putting the company ahead of us, for not considering that maybe some things, like our marriage, like not humiliating my family publicly, were worth more than business legacy. But then I spent this morning listening to my mother justify fraud and manipulation, and I realized that you didn't put the company ahead of us. You put integrity ahead of convenience, and I'm furious that doing the right thing costs this much. I reach across the table, not touching her but close enough that she could take my hand if she wanted to, offering connection without demanding it. I'm not going to lie and say the company didn't matter. It did matter. It still matters because it represents 40 years of my grandfather's values and 230 people's livelihoods and a kind of business ethics that feels increasingly rare. But Liv, what mattered more was not letting corruption win just because it was wearing expensive clothes and speaking corporate language and seducing my father into betraying everything he was supposed to believe in. So what happens now? Olivia asks, and the question encompasses everything. Our marriage, her relationship with her mother, my relationship with my father, the company's future, the legal battles that are probably coming, the media attention that's definitely coming. Now we decide if we're stronger together than the forces trying to pull us apart, I answer. Your mother is going to face consequences for fraud and embezzlement, and I can't stop that process because I have responsibilities to the company and our employees that override family loyalty. My father is resigning from the board and transferring his shares to a trust he doesn't control, and our relationship is probably broken beyond repair. But you and me live. We get to decide if we're casualties of their betrayals or survivors who choose each other despite the wreckage around us. Olivia is quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee like it contains answers that neither of us can find anywhere else. When she finally looks up, her warm brown eyes are clearer than they've been since this nightmare started. I'm not ready to forgive you for how public and brutal this became. I'm not ready to forgive my mother for what she did to your family and our marriage. I'm not ready to pretend that everything's fine or that love automatically fixes betrayal. But Daniel, I'm also not ready to walk away from 7 years of marriage without at least trying to figure out if there's a path forward that doesn't require me to choose between my history and my future. It's not the declaration of unwavering support I might have hoped for, but it's honest, and right now honesty is the only currency that has any value between us. Then we try, I say simply. We go to counseling. We rebuild trust slowly. We figure out boundaries around your mother and my father that let us maintain our integrity without forcing you to completely cut off your family. And we acknowledge that this might not work, that some damage can't be repaired, but at least we'll know we gave it an actual chance instead of just surrendering to the easiest narrative. Olivia reaches across the table and takes my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that feels both familiar and tentatively new. I need you to understand that I might maintain some relationship with my mother even as she's facing legal consequences. I need to process her betrayal on my own timeline, not according to corporate justice schedules. And I need you to not resent me for whatever complicated grief I'm going to feel about watching her fall apart. I understand, I promise, and I mean it even though I know it's going to be difficult watching Olivia support someone who tried to destroy everything I've fought for. And I need you to understand that the company might require decisions that seem cold or harsh from a family perspective, but are necessary from a business ethics standpoint. I can't protect your mother from consequences just to make your life easier. I know, Olivia says quietly. I wouldn't respect you if you did. We sit like that for several minutes, hands connected across scarred wooden table in a coffee shop where we first realized we might build something permanent together 9 years ago. And I think about how quickly everything can change when the people you trust turn out to be playing different games than you thought. My phone buzzes with a call from Kate. Media requesting official statement. Legal wants to discuss deposition schedules. And Daniel, Hamilton's strategic partners, just released a statement claiming their discussions with Evelyn were preliminary and unauthorized, throwing her completely under the bus to protect themselves. The real world is waiting outside this coffee shop booth with all its demands and complications and consequences. But for right now, for these few minutes, Olivia and I have decided that our marriage might be worth fighting for even when everything else is falling apart. I have to take this, I tell her, showing her Kate's name on the screen. Olivia nods, releases my hand. Go save the company. Again. But Daniel, tonight, I'm coming home. Not because everything's fixed, but because we're going to start fixing it together, or we're going to honestly figure out that we can't. Either way, we're not going to let our parents' mistakes define whether we survive. I answer Kate's call as I'm walking out of the coffee shop, already shifting back into CEO mode, because that's what the situation requires. But I look back once to see Olivia still sitting in our booth, and something about her expression tells me that maybe, just maybe, some things are worth fighting for even when fighting costs everything you thought you knew about loyalty and family and love. The media firestorm was about to explode across every business publication in Chicago. But first I had to face the employees who'd built their lives around Wright and Sons and explain why their company just became a scandal instead of a legacy. Chapter 8 brings you inside the emergency all-hands meeting where I had to choose between corporate spin and brutal honesty. And you won't believe how 230 employees reacted when I told them the unfiltered truth about what their leadership had done. Subscribe now because the next chapter includes Evelyn's first legal countermove, and it's more vicious than anything I anticipated. Plus, drop a comment telling me if you think Olivia made the right choice giving her marriage another chance, or if some betrayals are simply too deep to forgive. Standing in front of 230 employees at 4 p.m. on the day you've just publicly destroyed your company's reputation is like being on trial, without the comfort of knowing whether the jury plans to convict or acquit. And I can feel every set of eyes in the manufacturing floor assembly area judging whether I'm a hero or a villain, or just another executive who prioritized power over people. Kate stands beside me near the makeshift podium we've set up between production lines. Marcus has arranged the mic system that usually announces shift changes, and the crowd ranges from 20-year veterans like David Park, who know my grandfather's vision, to new hires who only know Wright and Sons through employee handbooks and quarterly meetings. I can see Luis Rodriguez from quality control with his arms crossed looking skeptical, Jennifer Chun from logistics whose sister works in accounting, Tom Morrison from maintenance who's been here longer than I've been alive, and dozens more whose livelihoods depend on decisions I've made in boardrooms they'll never enter. Thank you all for coming on short notice. I begin, my voice amplified across the cavernous space where we build the precision components that have kept this company viable for 4 decades. I know rumors have been circulating since this morning's board meeting, and you deserve to hear the truth directly from me rather than through gossip or tomorrow's business section. I take a breath, look at Kate who nods encouragement, and make the choice that will either build trust or destroy what little credibility I have left. This morning I removed Evelyn Harper from her position as prospective CEO and exposed evidence that she'd been embezzling company funds, manipulating corporate governance, and planning to sell Wright and Sons to a corporate acquisition firm that would have eliminated most of your jobs within 6 months. The crowd erupts in overlapping voices, shock, anger, questions shouted over each other, and I wait for the noise to settle before continuing. The evidence shows that Ms. Harper used a personal relationship with my father Richard Wright to gain control of his voting shares, then systematically positioned herself to profit from selling the company while presenting herself as bringing modern leadership to a family business. Jennifer Chin raises her hand, doesn't wait to be called on. If she was planning to sell the company, does that mean our jobs are still at risk? Because I've got 2 kids and a mortgage and I can't afford to be looking for new employment while this gets sorted out in court. It's the question everyone's thinking, and I appreciate her directness even though the answer is more complicated than she wants to hear. Your jobs are secure for now because the sale isn't happening. The reversion clause in our original partnership agreement returned control to bloodline heirs, which means me with board oversight, and I have zero intention of selling Wright and Sons to anyone. I pause, let that sink in. But I'm not going to lie to you and pretend everything's fine. We're facing legal bills, media attention, and the kind of corporate instability that makes clients nervous. The next 6 months are going to require everyone in this room to work harder and smarter than we have in years, and I can't promise bonuses or raises or smooth sailing. What I can promise is honesty, transparency about our financial situation, and leadership that prioritizes keeping this company employee-owned and community-focused rather than extracting maximum profit for shareholders. Luis Rodriguez speaks up without raising his hand, his voice carrying the weight of someone who's earned the right to challenge management. With all due respect, Daniel, this sounds like the mess your father made is becoming our problem. Why should we trust that you're any different from him or from Evelyn if the Wright family is apparently willing to burn everything down over personal drama? It's a fair question, and one I knew was coming because trust isn't inherited. It's earned through consistent behavior over time. You shouldn't trust me just because my last name is on the building, I answer directly. You should trust me, or not, based on whether my actions match my words over the next months and years. But here's what I can tell you about the difference between me and the people I removed today. Evelyn Harper saw this company as an asset to be liquidated for personal profit. My father saw it as legacy without responsibility, something he could neglect while pursuing personal satisfaction. I see Wright and Sons as 230 families depending on consistent paychecks, as community partnerships that span decades, as a commitment to building things that matter using people who matter, and yes, as my grandfather's vision that good business and ethical business don't have to be contradictory. I step away from the podium, walk closer to the crowd, removing the physical barrier between leadership and labor. So here's what's going to happen. Kate is conducting a full forensic audit that will be shared with department heads once it's complete. We're implementing new governance policies that require board approval for any major financial decisions. We're establishing an employee advisory council that gives you direct input into company direction. And we're creating a profit-sharing program that ensures when Wright and Sons does well financially, everyone in this room benefits proportionally. Tom Morrison, the maintenance veteran, nods slowly. Your grandfather did something similar after the '08 crash when he could have laid off half the floor, but instead cut executive salaries and kept everyone working. If you're serious about following his model instead of modern corporate extraction, you'll have my support. But Daniel, first sign you're lying to us or treating this company like your personal piggy bank. We'll know, and you'll lose more than credibility. Fair enough, I respond, extending my hand to Tom, who shakes it with the firm grip of someone who's made his position clear. I'm asking for the chance to prove through actions that I mean what I'm saying. Hold me accountable. Question decisions that don't make sense. And if I fail to live up to these commitments, call me out publicly just like Luis did today. Marcus steps forward with printed documents that he begins distributing to department heads. These are preliminary financials showing where we stand after recovering the embezzled funds from offshore accounts. We're not in crisis, but we're also not comfortable. Revenue projections for next quarter depend heavily on retaining our 3 largest clients who are understandably nervous about executive instability. I return to the podium for the final part of this meeting, the part I've been dreading because it requires admitting vulnerability in front of people who need to believe their leader has everything under control. I want to address the personal aspect of this situation because you're going to read about it in tomorrow's papers anyway. Evelyn Harper is my mother-in-law. This scandal has damaged my marriage, destroyed my relationship with my father, and turned my personal life into the kind of drama that belongs in television scripts rather than real companies. I'm telling you this not to generate sympathy, but to be honest about the fact that I'm navigating the same uncertainty and pain that you might be feeling about job security and company stability. My wife and I are trying to figure out if our marriage survives when her mother becomes the villain in our company's survival story. I'm trying to figure out if I can rebuild a relationship with my father that's based on something other than denial and enabling. And I'm trying to lead a company through a crisis that I didn't create, but that became my responsibility the moment I discovered it. I pause, look around the room at faces that have gone from skeptical to something more complex. Not quite sympathy, but perhaps recognition that we're all navigating disasters we didn't choose. So I'm asking for patience, for honest feedback, for the benefit of doubt while I prove through consistent action that Wright & Sons can be both financially successful and ethically grounded. And in return, I'm committing to transparency, to employee participation in decision-making, and to never, ever treating this company as anything less than a community of people who deserve leadership that respects their contribution and dignity. The applause that follows is scattered and uncertain, not the enthusiastic endorsement of a motivated workforce, but the tentative acknowledgement that maybe I've earned the right to try proving myself over the coming months. Kate announces that department heads will meet individually with her to review audit findings. Marcus establishes the schedule for the new Employee Advisory Council, and slowly the crowd disperses back to afternoon shifts and evening responsibilities, leaving me standing alone on the manufacturing floor, where my grandfather once told me that the measure of a leader isn't avoiding disaster, but how you respond when disaster becomes inevitable. My phone shows 17 missed calls, most from media outlets, but 3 from numbers I don't recognize that Kate later tells me are attorneys representing Evelyn Harper in what's apparently going to be a multi-front legal war. There's also a text from Olivia. Proud of you for being honest with them. Coming home at 7. We'll figure out dinner and everything else together. It's such a simple message about such ordinary things, dinner and coming home. But right now those ordinary things feel revolutionary because they represent choosing normalcy and connection when everything else is chaos and dissolution. You did good, Kate says, joining me as the last workers filter back to their stations. Honesty is always risky with employees because it exposes leadership vulnerability. But your grandfather taught me that people would rather follow someone flawed and honest than someone perfect and fake. How bad are the legal threats from Evelyn's attorneys? I ask, because I know Kate well enough to recognize that her reassurance is usually followed by realistic assessment of whatever disaster is lurking. Bad enough that we're going to need a litigation team, not just corporate counsel. She's claiming wrongful termination, defamation, breach of contract, and emotional distress. Her attorneys are also suggesting that your relationship with Olivia creates conflicts of interest in how you've handled this situation. Kate pulls up an email on her phone showing a demand letter that reads like a declaration of war disguised in legal language. Evelyn Harper wasn't going down without taking everyone she could reach with her, and the legal counterstrike she launched made the boardroom coup look like a friendly disagreement. Chapter 9 reveals the courtroom battle that almost destroyed everything I'd fought to save, including evidence about Evelyn's past that explained exactly how she became someone capable of this level of calculated destruction. So make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because you need to see what happens when family drama meets actual criminal investigation. Comment below telling me if you think employees should get more say in how companies are run, or if that's unrealistic idealism that would paralyze business decision-making. And hit that like button if you're invested in seeing how this all plays out. When Evelyn Harper's attorneys filed a 43-page lawsuit alleging wrongful termination, defamation, and tortious interference with business relationships, I realized that the boardroom victory was just the opening act of a much longer and more expensive war. The deposition room at Morrison & Associates 3 weeks after the emergency board meeting feels designed to intimidate with its mahogany walls and leather chairs and windows overlooking Chicago's financial district, where Evelyn once worked as a corporate attorney before she decided that seducing her daughter's father-in-law was a more efficient path to wealth. I'm sitting across from Evelyn for the first time since security escorted her from Wright & Sons, and she's transformed herself from disgraced executive to wronged professional with remarkable skill. Modest navy suit instead of her usual designer power clothes, minimal jewelry, hair styled simply rather than with her typical sophisticated precision. Her attorney, Richard Castellano, is one of those lawyers who charges $1,000 an hour to make lying sound like constitutional defense, and he's already spent 2 hours asking me variations of the same question. Isn't it true that your personal animus toward Ms. Harper influenced your decision to terminate her? Employment? No. I answer for what feels like the 20th time, maintaining the calm that our attorney Sarah Chin coached me on despite wanting to throw something at the smug expression Castellano wears like expensive cologne. My decision to invoke the reversion clause was based on documented evidence of corporate fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty, all of which I've provided in discovery along with bank records, emails, and testimony from multiple board members. Castellano slides another document across the table, this one showing text messages between me and Marcus Chun discussing Evelyn's relationship with my father. These communications show you were monitoring Ms. Harper's personal life and using private information to build a case against her professional performance. How is that not harassment? Those communications show me discovering that a board member was using an undisclosed romantic relationship to manipulate corporate governance. I counter, and beside me Sarah Chun makes a note on her legal pad that I recognize as approval for staying on message. The personal nature of the affair is only relevant because Ms. Harper leveraged that personal relationship for professional gain in violation of our ethics policies and likely in violation of securities law. Evelyn finally speaks, her voice carrying injured dignity that would be impressive if I didn't know it was performance art. Daniel has been threatened by my capabilities since I joined the advisory board. He saw me as competition rather than collaboration, and when his father and I formed a genuine connection, he weaponized that relationship to eliminate someone he perceived as a threat to his inherited authority. It's such a perfectly crafted reversal, painting herself as the competent outsider destroyed by nepotistic insecurity, that I almost admire the audacity even as I'm watching her try to reconstruct reality. Ms. Harper, Sarah Chin interjects smoothly, can you explain why genuine connection required moving $30 million in company funds to offshore accounts without board approval or disclosure to shareholders? The temperature in the room drops, and I watch Castellano's expression tighten because that's the question his entire defense strategy is designed to avoid. Those were legitimate international expansion accounts, Evelyn responds, but her voice has lost some of its injured dignity and now sounds defensive. The preliminary discussions with Hamilton strategic partners were exploratory due diligence, nothing more. Exploratory due diligence that included valuation models, proposed sale prices, and your personal profit calculations? Sarah continues, pulling out the emails that Marcus recovered from company servers, showing exactly how much Evelyn stood to gain from selling Wright & Sons. That doesn't sound like exploration, Ms. Harper. That sounds like planning. The deposition continues for another 3 hours, covering everything from Evelyn's relationship timeline with Richard to her financial background to her previous employment history. And it's during this final section that Sarah drops the information that changes the trajectory of the entire case. Ms. Harper, you were previously employed by Davidson Capital Management from 2015 to 2018, correct? Sarah asks, pulling out a document that I haven't seen before. And you left that position under circumstances involving allegations of improper relationships with clients to gain investment accounts? Evelyn's face goes pale. Castellano immediately objects. And I realize that Sarah has been conducting parallel investigation into Evelyn's past that she didn't share with me because attorney-client privilege works both ways. My employment history is not relevant to this case, Castellano argues. It's absolutely relevant, Sarah counters, because it establishes a pattern of using personal relationships to advance professional goals, which directly contradicts Ms. Harper's claim that her relationship with Richard Wright was genuine connection rather than strategic manipulation. The deposition ends with Castellano demanding time to review this new information and Sarah agreeing to reconvene in 2 weeks. But the damage is done because everyone in that room now understands that Evelyn's current behavior isn't an isolated incident, but a refined version of tactics she's been using for years. In the elevator down to street level, Sarah finally explains what she's discovered. Davidson Capital settled a harassment complaint from 3 different clients who alleged that Evelyn cultivated romantic or sexual relationships to convince them to move their investment portfolios to accounts she managed. The settlement included non-disclosure agreements, but I found sealed court documents through a former colleague who specializes in employment litigation. She shows me her tablet displaying pages of legal filings that paint a picture of someone who's been weaponizing intimacy and trust for professional advancement since long before she met my father. This doesn't make me feel better, I tell Sarah as we step out into the cold November afternoon. It just makes me realize that my father never had a chance against someone who's been perfecting these techniques for a decade. He was lonely and vulnerable, and she identified that vulnerability like a predator identifies prey. The court won't care about your emotional response, Sarah says pragmatically. The court will care that Evelyn Harper has a documented history of using personal relationships for professional exploitation, which supports our defense that your termination decision was based on legitimate business concerns rather than personal animus. She closes her tablet, looks at me with the kind of direct assessment that good attorneys excel at. But Daniel, you need to prepare yourself for this getting uglier. Evelyn's attorneys are going to argue that you're slut-shaming her, that you're using sexist double standards, that powerful women are always accused of sleeping their way to success. They're going to make this about gender politics and corporate misogyny rather than fraud and embezzlement. Let them, I respond, because I've spent the past 3 weeks learning that sometimes the only way through hell is straight ahead. We have bank records, we have emails, we have testimony from board members, and now we have evidence of pattern behavior. If they want to turn corporate fraud into a referendum on workplace sexism, we'll argue that accountability isn't gendered and neither is theft. My phone rings, Kate calling from the office. The audit is complete. You're going to want to see this before the next board meeting, because it's worse than we thought. Evelyn didn't just move $30 million. She systematically overstated revenue projections, understated liability exposure, and created shadow contracts that would have triggered penalty clauses if the Hamilton sale had gone through. We're talking about potential criminal charges beyond civil fraud. I lean against the cold stone of the building, watching Chicago rush hour traffic flow past, while trying to process that the person my father thought he loved was capable of this level of systematic deception. Send me the full report. Schedule an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. And Kate, make sure Richard sees it before the meeting because he needs to understand exactly what he almost let destroy 40 years of my grandfather's work. That evening I return home to find Olivia cooking dinner in our kitchen, something she hasn't done since before this crisis began, and the normalcy of it, the smell of garlic and herbs, her moving between stove and cutting board with familiar efficiency, music playing softly from the speaker on the counter. Feels both comforting and fragile, like we're playing house in the ruins of what used to be our life. How was the deposition? She asks without turning from the stove, and I can hear the careful neutrality in her voice because we've been navigating this space where she's allowed to still love her mother while I'm prosecuting that mother's crimes. Brutal, I answer honestly. Your mother's attorneys are good. They're going to make this about everything except what she actually did. But Olivia, Sarah found evidence that your mom has done this before. Used relationships with clients to advance her career, left previous jobs under circumstances involving similar allegations. I watch Olivia's shoulders stiffen, the wooden spoon in her hand pausing mid-stir. Part of me already knew, she says quietly. Mom's always been ambitious, always calculated about relationships. When I was a teenager, I watched her cultivate friendships with people who could help her career, drop them when they were no longer useful. I told myself it was just networking, just survival in a competitive world. But Daniel, finding out that she's been doing this systematically, that your father was just another mark in a long-term strategy. Her voice breaks, and I cross the kitchen to stand beside her, not touching but present. Could we build something honest from the wreckage of so many lies? Or were we just postponing the inevitable collapse by pretending that love survives when everything else burns? Chapter 10 reveals the final confrontation and whether Daniel's fight to save his company costs him everything else that matters, including the woman who chose to stay when leaving would have been easier. This is the conclusion you've been waiting for, so make sure you're subscribed because the ending includes twists about Richard's role that nobody saw coming and a decision about Wright and Son's future that changes everything. Drop a comment now telling me what you think Daniel and Olivia should do. Stay together and rebuild, or acknowledge that some damage can't be repaired. And smash that like button if this story has kept you hooked from the beginning. 6 months after the boardroom showdown that exposed Evelyn Harper's systematic fraud, I'm standing in the same conference room where this war began. Except this time the meeting isn't about corporate coups or legal depositions. It's about deciding whether to finally let go of the ghost of what Wright and Sons used to be and embrace what it needs to become. The forensic audit that Kate completed revealed $38 million in financial irregularities, not just the $30 million we initially discovered, and Evelyn is currently facing federal charges for wire fraud and securities violations that could result in a decade in prison. Her attorneys managed to delay the criminal trial until next spring. But the civil case settled 3 weeks ago when her insurance company paid Wright and Sons a $12 million judgment rather than risk going to court with the evidence Sarah Chun had assembled. Richard officially resigned from the board in December, moved to Arizona where apparently he's living with his sister and trying to figure out who he is when he's not defined by my grandfather's legacy or Evelyn's manipulation. We talk once a month on the phone. Stilted conversations where we discuss weather and neutral topics while carefully avoiding the wreckage of our relationship, and maybe that's the best we can manage for now. Olivia and I spent 4 months in intensive couples therapy with Dr. Patricia Morrison, who specialized in helping relationships survive catastrophic betrayal, and what we discovered is that our marriage could survive her mother's crimes but struggled more with the everyday negotiations of whose pain took priority and whose family loyalty deserved accommodation. Some weeks we were closer than we'd been in years, connected by shared trauma and the choice to keep choosing each other. Other weeks we were strangers sharing a house, each processing our grief in incompatible ways that created distance no amount of good intentions could bridge. This morning's board meeting is to vote on a proposal that Marcus and I developed over the past 3 months. Converting Wright and Sons from a traditional family-owned corporation into an employee ownership trust that would give every worker equity stakes and voting rights in company decisions. It's a radical restructuring that would dilute my personal control, but distribute both profits and responsibilities across everyone who builds their lives around this company. And it's the kind of decision my grandfather might have made if he'd lived long enough to see how concentrated family ownership could become a vulnerability rather than a strength. Kate is presenting the financial models that show how the transition would work. Marcus is explaining the governance structure that ensures competent leadership while maximizing employee participation, and the board members who've stayed through this chaos. Sharon Hastings, David Park, Gerald Thompson, plus 3 new members we recruited specifically for their experience with cooperative business models, are asking the kinds of detailed questions that indicate they're taking this seriously. The conversion would take approximately 18 months. Kate explains, showing timelines and phase implementation. During that transition, Daniel would remain as CEO, but with reduced individual authority and increased accountability to the employee ownership board. After 5 years, his position would be subject to election by the worker owners just like any other leadership role. Sharon Hastings, who's been skeptical of every major decision since the Evelyn disaster, actually looks impressed. This would make Wright and Sons one of the largest employee-owned manufacturers in the Midwest. It would also make us attractive to clients who value ethical supply chains and would insulate us from future takeover attempts because there'd be no single controlling shareholder to manipulate. That's exactly the point, I respond. What happened with Evelyn and my father revealed that family ownership creates vulnerabilities that can be exploited by anyone willing to target personal relationships. But if ownership is distributed across 250 employees, we've hired 20 more people since stabilizing operations, then there's no single point of failure, no individual whose poor judgment can compromise the entire organization. David Park raises his hand, old school protocol that makes me smile despite the tension. Daniel, I appreciate what you're proposing, but I have to ask, are you doing this because you genuinely believe it's the right structure for the company, or because you're trying to distance yourself from family legacy after what your father did? It's the question I've been asking myself for 3 months, and I appreciate David's directness, even as I'm formulating an answer that's honest rather than politically convenient. Both, I admit. I believe employee ownership aligns with my grandfather's actual values better than family inheritance did. He cared about people and community and building things that mattered, and I think he'd recognize that those values are better protected by distributing power than concentrating it. But you're right that part of my motivation is personal. I've spent 6 months watching my family's dysfunction become corporate liability, and I don't want my future mistakes or my children's mistakes to have the same potential for company-wide destruction. Gerald Thompson nods slowly. Your grandfather used to say that the difference between a family business and a dynasty is whether you're building something that serves people or something that serves your ego. This proposal suggests you understand that difference. The vote is unanimous to move forward with the employee ownership conversion, and as board members file out discussing implementation details, I'm left in the conference room that's been the setting for so much of this drama. The place where I learned my father had betrayed us, where I exposed Evelyn's fraud, where I just voted to give away the controlling interest my grandfather built over 40 years. My phone shows a text from Olivia. Deposition with Mom's attorneys finished. She tried to talk to me after. I didn't engage. Coming home early. Let's do something normal like watch bad TV and eat takeout. We've gotten better at this. The quick check-ins, the acknowledgement that she's navigating an impossible situation with her mother facing prison. The small gestures toward normalcy that keep us connected even when connection feels fragile. Her mother still calls from Chicago where she's awaiting trial, still tries to convince Olivia that she's the victim of corporate sexism and right family vindictiveness. And Olivia still takes those calls sometimes because completely cutting off your parent is harder than outsiders imagine even when that parent is demonstrably terrible. I drive home through Chicago late afternoon traffic, past the neighborhoods where Wright & Sons has sponsored youth programs for 30 years, past the community center that bears my grandfather's name, past the lives that continue regardless of whatever drama plays out in conference rooms and courtrooms. The house Olivia and I bought 3 years ago looks exactly the same from the outside. Same red door, same small front garden, same porch light that she always leaves on. But inside we've been slowly rebuilding something that feels both familiar and entirely new. We've learned that staying together requires daily choice rather than assumed permanence, that love survives betrayal only if you're willing to acknowledge the damage rather than pretend everything's fine, and that sometimes the hardest battles aren't against external enemies, but against your own expectations of what healing should look like. She's sitting on the couch when I walk in, still in her work clothes from the deposition, and there's exhaustion in her eyes that matches my own because we're both carrying weight that doesn't get lighter just because months have passed. Board voted unanimously for the employee ownership conversion. I tell her, setting down my briefcase and joining her on the couch with careful distance that she closes by leaning against my shoulder. So in 18 months, I won't be heir to Wright & Sons anymore. I'll just be CEO subject to election by worker owners who can fire me if I don't serve the company well. Good, Olivia says simply. Your grandfather's legacy shouldn't be a prison that determines your entire life. Neither should my mother's crimes determine mine. We get to decide what we keep and what we release, and Daniel, I think we're both better at releasing than we used to be. It's not a declaration of perfect happiness or complete healing, but it's honest acknowledgement that we're still here, still choosing each other, still building something from the pieces of what shattered 6 months ago. Outside our window, Chicago continues its evening routine, traffic, commuters, lives being lived in all their ordinary complexity. And inside our house, 2 people who survived betrayal and corporate warfare and family dissolution are ordering Thai food and queuing up a cooking competition show because sometimes survival looks less like dramatic victory and more like choosing to be present for another ordinary evening. 3 weeks later, I'm back in that conference room, the one where everything fell apart and then slowly came back together, for the press conference announcing Wright & Sons' conversion to employee ownership. The manufacturing floor below is filled with workers whose jobs are about to become equity stakes, whose voices are about to gain board-level authority, whose futures are being determined by collective choice rather than inherited privilege. I'm standing beside Kate and Marcus and David Park, looking at the journalists assembled to cover this unusual restructuring. And I'm thinking about my grandfather Harold Wright, who built something good and imperfect, who tried to protect it with legal safeguards and family loyalty, who couldn't have anticipated how thoroughly his son would fail those responsibilities. 40 years ago, my grandfather started Wright & Sons with the belief that good business and ethical business could coexist. I begin, reading from notes I've revised a dozen times. Today we're honoring that belief by restructuring our company in a way that distributes both the rewards and responsibilities of ownership to everyone who makes this company successful. This isn't a concession or a retreat from family legacy. It's an evolution of the values that legacy was supposed to represent. The questions that follow are predictable. How will this affect profitability? What about family succession? Isn't this politically motivated? What about the pending criminal case against your former board member? I answer them all with the honesty we've learned is the only sustainable policy. And when a reporter from the Tribune asks whether this decision was influenced by my father's betrayal, I don't dodge. My father's actions revealed that concentrated family ownership creates vulnerabilities that can be exploited by anyone willing to target personal relationships. This restructuring addresses that vulnerability while simultaneously aligning our governance model with our stated values about community and employee dignity. So yes, his betrayal influenced this decision, but not because I'm angry or vindictive, because I learned from his failure and chose to build something more resilient. After the press conference, after the journalists pack up their equipment and the workers return to afternoon shifts, I find myself alone again in that conference room where this entire nightmare and transformation began. My phone shows emails from Olivia about dinner plans, from Sarah Chun about final settlement details in Evelyn's civil case, from Richard with his monthly check-in that I'll respond to eventually when I have the emotional energy for that particular form of complicated forgiveness. I stand at the window looking down at the manufacturing floor where precision components are being built by people whose lives intersect with mine through shared purpose rather than blood relation or inherited obligation. And I realize that what I thought was the end of something was actually the beginning of figuring out what leadership means when it's not about protecting legacy, but about serving community. The company my grandfather built survived betrayal and corporate warfare, and now it belongs to everyone who makes it work, rather than one family who happened to start it. My marriage survived the revelation that Olivia's mother was capable of systematic fraud, and now it's built on daily choice rather than assumed permanence. My relationship with my father might never fully heal, but it's honest for the first time in decades, which is its own kind of progress. And me, I'm no longer the heir to Wright & Sons protecting inherited privilege. I'm the current CEO of an employee-owned company, subject to accountability and election, building something that might outlast my tenure specifically because it's not dependent on my judgment alone. 6 months ago, I watched my mother-in-law try to destroy everything my grandfather built, and I responded by dismantling her coup and then voluntarily giving away the power she tried to steal. That's the ending nobody expected, least of all me. But it's the ending that makes sense when you realize that the things worth protecting are values and people and communities, not names on buildings or inherited board seats or the comfort of dynastic succession. The company survived. Some relationships survived. The legacy evolved into something better than inheritance. And that's the real victory. Not defeating Evelyn Harper, but building something resilient enough that one person's betrayal couldn't destroy 40 years of work and 250 families' livelihoods. Thanks for watching this entire journey from betrayal to transformation. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose between loyalty and integrity, or if you believe that businesses should serve communities rather than just enriching founders, leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Subscribe to this channel because we're going to be exploring more stories about ordinary people navigating extraordinary moral dilemmas in business, family, and life. And remember, sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't wealth or power. It's the wisdom to know when to let go of both and build something better than what came before. Until next time, choose integrity over comfort, community over dynasty, and never underestimate the power of accountability to transform corporate warfare into collective ownership.